God, it was beautiful. I positioned the camera at the edge of a cliff, making sure the backdrop captured a vast expanse of mountains bathed in golden sunlight. It was breathtaking, exactly the kind of view that would make my followers freak out. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, and flashed my best smile at the lens. Hey guys! Landon here, bringing you some serious mountain magic. Look at this! I gestured dramatically to the view behind me. This is what you call living the dream. No filters needed. I paused for a moment, enjoying the view along with the imaginary company of my followers. Then, just as I was about to spin the camera around for a full panoramic shot, I noticed something. A shadow. A figure moving behind me. My heart jumped into my throat. I had read too many stories of cannibalism not to freak out. I slowly turned around, but as I did, my foot slipped on the loose rock. Before I could react, I was tumbling backward off the cliff. The world spun. Sky and earth blurring together. My arms flailed trying to grab onto something. Anything. I could hear my camera clattering down beside me, and then, crack. The live stream cut off. My body hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. Pain shooting up my leg and spreading through my body. I groaned, trying to catch my breath, my mind still reeling from the fall. That's when I saw him, a tall figure standing over me, looking concerned. He had blonde hair that caught the sunlight and piercing blue eyes that seemed to glow in the dimming light. "Kava?" he asked, his voice smooth, with a thick accent. It took me a second to realize he was speaking French. I blinked up at him, the pain in my knees and ankle making it hard to think straight. What the hell? I croaked, trying to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my leg, forcing me back down. Ignoring the pain for a moment, I looked around for my camera. It wasn't hard to find. It was in pieces. The lens shattered, and the body cracked open like an egg. I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. That camera was my life. Without it, I couldn't vlog, couldn't connect with my followers. And now I was ruined. "Damn it!" I shouted, more to myself than anyone else. I tried to get up again, but my leg gave out, sending me crashing back to the ground. The stranger crouched beside me, pointing at my bleeding knees. Concern etched on his face. "Leave me alone!" I snapped, the frustration boiling over. "This is your fault. If you hadn't snuck up on me..." He looked confused, maybe not understanding much of what I was saying. He hesitated for a moment, but then reached out again, offering his hand. His expression was gentle, almost pleading. But I wasn't in the mood to accept help, not from him. "I said go away," I shouted, smacking his hand aside. "Haven't you done enough?" He flinched at my outburst, his eyes widening. For a moment, he looked like he was going to leave me there, but instead, he stayed. He knelt beside me, pointing at my knees again, then at my ankle. He said something else in French, but I couldn't make out the words. I wanted to be mad at him, to blame him for everything that had gone wrong, but the truth was, I was in pain, and I needed help. My knees were bleeding, my ankle was twisted, and I was stuck at the bottom of a cliff with no way to call for help. My phone was in my bag, still up on the cliff where I'd left it. "Why won't you just go?" I muttered, more to myself this time. But the stranger didn't budge. He stayed right there, watching me with those intense blue eyes. His hand still outstretched. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, I let out a defeated sigh. "Fine," I grumbled, reaching up to take his hand. His grip was strong but gentle, and he carefully helped me to my feet. I winced as soon as I put weight on my ankle, nearly collapsing again, but he caught me, holding me steady. "Merci," I mumbled, the one French word I actually knew. It felt weird to thank him after I'd just yelled at him, but I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Together, we limped over to the remnants of my camera. I could feel the tears prickling at the corners of my eyes as I looked at it. The thing was completely total. No way I was going to salvage any footage from it. My heart sank even further. This trip was supposed to be my big break. The one that would take my channel to the next level. And now, well, now I was screwed. The stranger must have noticed the look on my face because he said something else in French, his tone soft and reassuring. I didn't understand a word, but there was something comforting about the sound of his voice. It made me feel a little less alone. He knelt down and picked up one of the larger pieces of my camera, turning it over in his hands. His brow furrowed as he examined the damage, and then he looked at me, his expression apologetic. I sighed again, this time out of exhaustion. It's not your fault, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I was just, I don't know, scared, I guess. Didn't mean to take it out on you. He tilted his head slightly as if thinking about something, but the soft smile remained. I couldn't help but smile back just a little. There was something about him, something kind and patient, that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. We stood there in silence for a while. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountains. Maybe he noticed it too, because he gestured toward a fallen tree not too far away. I stared at him, puzzled, as he motioned for me to sit down on it. Was he trying to help me? Okay, I said hesitantly, following his lead. It's not like I had many options, stuck in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who didn't speak English. I limped over to the tree and sat down with a huff, the pain in my knees flaring up as I moved. Andre, he said, pointing to himself. Landon, I replied. He opened his backpack and started rummaging through it. I watched, a little apprehensive, as he pulled out a small first aid kit. I blinked in surprise. You've got a first aid kit? Of course you do, I muttered to myself, a little embarrassed. Wasn't exactly prepared for this kind of situation, and here was this stranger, all calm and collected, ready to patch me up. Andre knelt down in front of me, his movements careful as he opened the kit. He glanced up at me, as if asking for permission. I nodded, not really knowing what else to do. It's not like I could bandage myself up with my knees in the state they were in. He gently lifted the fabric of my torn jeans, his fingers brushing against my skin. I flinched slightly from the pain, but tried to keep still. Andre's touch was surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the blood from my knees with a small antiseptic wipe. You do this often? I asked, trying to distract myself from the pain. Didn't seem to understand, but he offered a small smile, which I took as an attempt at reassurance. As he worked, I couldn't help but study him more closely. His blonde hair caught the light, and his blue eyes were bright, even in the fading daylight. There was something almost soothing about him, despite the awkward situation we were in. Guess it was the way he seemed so calm, even though we couldn't really communicate. Or maybe it was just that he was, well, really attractive. After cleaning my wounds, Andre pulled out a roll of bandages from his kit. He wrapped them around my knees with care and his hands steady. I was surprised by how efficient he was, and a small part of me was grateful he had shown up when he did. I probably would have been stuck here, bleeding and clueless, if it weren't for him. Merci, he said softly once he finished bandaging me up. Thank you, I replied, offering a small smile in return. For, helping me out. He didn't respond verbally, probably didn't understand me, but his smile widened a bit. That was enough for me. With the first aid done, Andre stood up and offered me his hand to help me get up. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a bit awkward about needing help, but my knees were throbbing and I knew I couldn't get up on my own without looking like a complete idiot. I took his hand and he pulled me up with surprising strength. My knees protested and I winced. I tried to get up, but my legs gave away. To my surprise, he knelt down in front of me, facing the opposite direction, and pointing towards his back. God, was he offering me a piggyback ride? No, I stammered, but he just looked at me with a gaze that made me want to obey his every command. Carefully, I got on his back, and with a swift move, he stood straight with me on his back. This was embarrassing beyond words. For a moment, he walked quietly, the silence between us filled with the sounds of the surrounding forest. It was peaceful in a way, but also strange. I was out here in the middle of nowhere with a guy I couldn't communicate with, and yet there was this odd sense of connection between us. Maybe it was just a situation, the way we had to rely on each other. 1 hour later. On do it. Find, shelter, Andre muttered, squinting into the distance. His French was smooth and quick, but the few English words he sprinkled in came out broken, as if they were foreign objects in his mouth. I nodded. Not sure what he said exactly, but I got the gist. We needed to find somewhere to stay for the night. It was clear we weren't going to make it back to civilization before dark. Just when I thought we'd have to sleep under the stars, or worse, keep walking until we dropped, Andre pointed out. Là-bas. There. Following his gaze, I spotted where he was pointing at. A small, weathered hut, barely visible in the dim light. The roof slightly caved in and vines crawled up the sides, but at this point, it was the best option we had. Perfect, I muttered, more to myself than to him. The door creaked loudly as Andre pushed it open. Inside, the hut was as worn as it looked from the outside. The wooden floorboards groaned under our weight, and dust hung thick in the air. There was a small fireplace against one wall, a beat-up sofa near the door, a rickety bed shoved into the corner. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Andre immediately set to work, moving toward the fireplace. Shiva, make fire, he said, his words choppy but understandable. I watched him for a moment, admiring how focused he was, before deciding to explore the hut just a little. There wasn't much to see, but it felt good to move, despite the pain. I checked out the bed, pressing down on the mattress. If you could call it that. It was lumpy and stiff, but I'd take it over the hard ground any day. A soft crackling sound drew my attention back to Andre. He had managed to get a fire going, the flames flickering warmly in the small space. The light danced across my face, highlighting his sharp features, and I found myself staring a little too long. Shaking my head to clear it, I joined him by the fire, holding my hands out to warm them. Merci, I said. He smiled, a little lopsided grin that made my heart skip a beat. Pas de problème, he replied, before reaching into his bag and pulling out what looked like a small loaf of bread. My stomach rumbled loudly at the sight of it, and I realized just how hungry I was. I hadn't eaten anything since... I couldn't even remember when. Andre noticed, of course, and he frowned slightly, looking from the bread to me and back again. It was clear there wasn't much, definitely not enough for 2 grown men. I was about to tell him that he should eat it, that I could go without, but before I could, he started tearing the bread in half. You, eat, he said, holding out one of the pieces to me. I hesitated, feeling guilty for taking his food, but the look on his face told me not to argue. He was offering it to me out of kindness, and I wasn't about to refuse that. Thank you, I said quietly, taking the bread from him. We sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire only sound between us. It was a comfortable silence, though, a peaceful moment in the middle of a chaotic day. Finally, when the last crumbs were gone and the fire had settled into a steady burn, Andre stood up and gestured to the bed. Toi, you, sleep bed, he said, struggling with the words but getting his point across. He pointed to himself and then to the sofa. Moi, sleep here. I frowned, shaking my head. No way. You take the bed. You've done all the work. I tried to insist, but Andre just shook his head stubbornly. Non, non. You need sleep. More comfort, he said, his English halting but firm. He wasn't going to back down. So, he did understand me after all. Maybe it was the speaking part he had a problem with. I sighed, knowing I wasn't going to win this one. Okay, fine. But if you get too cold, we're switching. He smiled again, the same lopsided grin, and nodded. Deal. I moved over to the bed and sat down on it. It wasn't much better up close, lumpy and uneven, but as soon as I lay back, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. My body ached and my eyes were heavy. Andre busied himself with making the sofa as comfortable as possible, which wasn't saying much. He grabbed an old blanket from the corner and draped it over himself, lying down with his feet hanging off the edge. I felt a pang of guilt watching him try to get comfortable on that tiny, beat-up sofa, but I was too tired to argue anymore. Bonne nuit, he said, softly, closing his eyes. Good night, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the crackle of the fire and the steady sound of Andre's breathing. The events of the day played over in my mind, from getting lost to meeting the strange kind man who was now sleeping in an uncomfortable sofa so I could have a bed. It was hard to believe how much had happened in such a short time. Now someone I couldn't even talk to properly had become such a friend. Maybe more. I wasn't sure what this was, but I knew one thing. I didn't want it to end just yet. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in my mind. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who didn't speak my language, but somehow it didn't feel so bad. In fact, it felt kind of nice. In the middle of the night, I was deep in sleep, lost in some half-forgotten dream when a scream jolted me awake. My heart raced as I sat up in the darkness, trying to figure out where the noise came from. Was that Andre? I quickly looked around, my eyes adjusting to the dim light of the moon filtering through the window. There was again a high-pitched, terrified scream. I turned to see Andre, who was sitting up on the side of the sofa, his eyes wide and his mouth open as he continued to yell at the top of his lungs. Andre! I called out, my voice thick with sleep and confusion. What's going on? He didn't respond, just kept screaming, his gaze fixed on something in front of him. I limped over to him, my ankle still sore from the earlier fall. Hey, are you okay? I asked, my voice louder this time, trying to break through his panic. Andre pointed a shaky finger at something on the floor. His voice was trembling as he said, On the bed! One monster! I squinted, trying to see what had him so terrified. Then I saw it. A small, harmless cockroach scuttling across the floor. I stared at it for a second, then burst out laughing. You're screaming because of a cockroach? Andre's face turned bright red. He stopped screaming, his embarrassment obvious. That's good done. He stammered, his French accent thicker now that he was flustered. I know, like, how you say, bugs. Still chuckling, I grabbed a nearby shoe and swiftly brought it down on the roach, ending its short-lived reign of terror. There, I said, smiling at him. It's dead. You're safe now. He looked at the squashed insect, then back at me, relief spreading across his face. Merci, Landon, he said, his voice soft and a bit sheepish. No problem, I replied, tossing the shoe aside. As I turned to head back to the bed, I hesitated, a thought crossing my mind. What if there were more bugs around? I wasn't exactly thrilled at the idea of sleeping on the sofa, near the door especially. If Andre's little friend had any siblings lurking nearby. I glanced back at Andre, who was still looking a bit shaken. The idea of sleeping alone in the bed suddenly didn't seem so appealing. Hey, Andre? Yes? He looked up at me, still embarrassed by the whole cockroach incident. I scratched at the back of my neck, feeling a bit awkward. Do you, maybe want to sleep in my bed? I mean, just to, avoid any more bugs? Andre's eyes widened, and for a moment he thought he might refuse. His blush deepened, and he looked at me with a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. Of it, you? In your bed? Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was beating a little faster. It's just, I don't really want to deal with any more surprises tonight. That's probably safer. Together? He hesitated, clearly torn. But then he gave a small nod, his blush still very much present. Okay, yes, I come with you. I smiled at him, relieved that he didn't think it was too weird. Great, come on then. We both climbed into my bed, which was a bit too small for two people, but neither of us seemed to mind. It felt strangely comfortable, despite the circumstances. We lay there in the darkness, close enough that I could feel his warmth beside me. Sorry for scream, Andre said quietly after a few moments of silence. His voice was soft, almost embarrassed. I chuckled. Don't worry about it. The cockroach did look pretty scary. He laughed too, a soft, nervous laugh that made him smile. I know like buds. Never. Noted, I replied, grinning even though you couldn't see it in the dark. Mercy, Landon, he said again, this time with a bit more confidence. I turned my head slightly to look at him, even though it was too dark to really see his face, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket. You just need to work on your bug fighting skills. He chuckled softly, and we both fell into a comfortable silence. My thoughts drifted as I slowly started to relax. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was just the fact that I was sharing a bed with someone who, despite the language barrier, had become more than just a random stranger. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it felt something. A spark, a connection, whatever you want to call it. Sleep finally started to pull me under. I couldn't help but wonder if this strange, funny, and completely unexpected relationship could turn into something more. But that was a question for another day. For now, I was just grateful to have someone beside me, even if he was terrified of cockroaches. The next morning. Waking up was like coming out of the best dream I ever had. For a moment, I was half asleep, enveloped in warmth and comfort. But when I blinked, my eyes opened, and I realized where I was. I almost jumped out of my skin. Andre's face was right there, inches from mine. His blonde hair was tousled, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look even more like some kind of angel. His chest rose and fell slowly, and his breathing deep and steady. I stared at him, half in disbelief. How had I ended up here, with this insanely hot stranger wrapped around me? My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized how close we were. His arm draped over my waist, our legs tangled together. I could feel his warmth, his breath over my skin. For a second, I just laid there, soaking it all in. But then reality hit me. I was in the middle of nowhere, stuck with a guy I could barely communicate with, and I was dangerously close to kissing him in his sleep. Whew. My cheeks burned as I carefully untangled myself from him, trying not to wake him up. Andre stirred a little, but didn't wake. I sat up and ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breath. I couldn't afford to get up, caught up in whatever this was. I needed to get out of here and find our way back. That was the priority. A little while later, Andre woke up. He stretched and blinked at me, his blue eyes still hazy with sleep. Bonjour, he mumbled, flashing me a sleepy smile that made my heart skip a beat. Hey, I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. We should, get going. Find a road or something. Andre nodded, still looking half asleep, and we gathered our stuff. We didn't have much. A couple bags, a bottle of water, and clothes on our backs. But at least we were still alive and together. That had to count for something. We started walking, the morning sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. For a while, we walked in silence. My ankle, thankfully, so much better after a night's rest. After what felt like hours, the sky darkened suddenly, with a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. I glanced up, frowning as the first drops of rain began to fall. Great, I muttered under my breath, pulling my jacket tighter around myself. The rain quickly picked up, turning into a downpour in a matter of minutes. We were soaked in seconds, and the cold water seeped through my bandages, making my wound sting. Andre noticed, and his face fell into concern. He grabbed my arm and pointed to a large tree nearby. Là-bas! Tree! Shelter! We dashed for the tree, its thick branches offering some protection from the rain, though it wasn't much. I leaned against the trunk, shivering as the rain pelted down, my hair plastered to my forehead. Andre stood in front of me, his clothes soaked through, but he didn't seem to care. Instead, he looked to me, then down on my knee, frowning. The next thing I knew, he was right in front of me, pressing me back against the tree. His hands rested on either side of my head, his body shielding me from the rain. I could barely breathe. He was so close. Our noses were almost touching, his breath warm against my face. My heart pounded so loudly that I was sure he could hear it. Andre, I started, my voice barely above a whisper, but I didn't know what to say. All I could think about was how badly I wanted to kiss him. His eyes flicked down to my lips. For a moment, I was sure he felt the same way. I started to lean in just a little when a loud honk nearly made me jump out of my skin. A Jeep pulled up on the dirt road nearby, its headlights cutting through the rain. An older man leaned out the window, waving at us. Need a ride? He called, his voice gruff but friendly. Andre immediately stepped back, waving and smiling at the man. Oui, merci, thank you. Let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, a mixture of relief and disappointment washing over me. We hurried to the Jeep, Andre helping me climb into the back seat. The old man glanced at us, taking in our soaked clothes and bedraggled appearances. Where are you two heading? He asked as he started the engine. City, Andre replied, his English halting but clear enough. Hotel. Need rest. The man nodded and drove off, the sound of the rain fading as we sped down the road. I leaned back in the seat, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and confusion. What had just happened? And what was going on between me and Andre? I glanced over at him, and he caught my eye, giving me a small, reassuring smile. A little while later, after the old man dropped us off, we managed to find a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was dry, warm, and had a bed. Exactly what we needed. We managed to get a room for the night, despite it being overly crowded, and got our tickets for the next morning. Our plan was to catch the first bus out to the airport and finally make our way back to our homes. I had already taken a shower, washing off the grime and exhaustion from the past couple of days. Now I was sitting on the bed, flipping through channels on the small TV, trying to distract myself from the fact that Andre was in the bathroom, just a few feet away. The sound of the shower running had stopped a while ago, and I could hear him moving around in there. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, but I wasn't really paying attention to whatever was on. My mind kept drifting back to that moment under the tree. How close we'd been. How his eyes had lingered on my lips. Part of me was nervous, unsure of what might happen next. We were stuck in this tiny room together, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I didn't know how much more of this I could take before something gave. Suddenly, the bathroom door swung open, and Andre stepped out. My breath caught in my throat. He was wearing nothing but a towel wrapped loosely around his waist, droplets of water still clinging to his skin. His blonde hair was damp, falling messily over his forehead, and his blue eyes seemed to pierce right through me. All I could do was stare. My eyes wide as I took him in. He was stunning. I felt my face heat up, and I quickly averted my gaze, pretending to be interested in the TV again. But it was too late. I'd been caught. Andre chuckled softly, a sound that made my heart skip a beat. "Landon," he said, his voice low and teasing. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look back at him. "Yeah?" He stepped closer. His gaze locked on mine. There was something different in his eyes now. Something that made my pulse race. "You, want kiss me?" he asked, his accent thick, but his words clear enough. My mouth went dry, and for a second, I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But couldn't find the words. Instead, I just nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. A small smile tugged at the corners of Andre's lips as he moved closer, stopping right in front of me. "Good," he murmured, leaning in so our faces were only inches apart. "I want." Before I could process what was happening, he closed the distance between us, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss started off soft, almost hesitant, but it quickly deepened. I reached up, my hands finding their way onto his shoulders, pulling him closer as I lost myself in the feel of him. His hands were on me too, one slipping around my waist while the other cupped the back of my neck. The towel around his waist was barely holding on, and I could feel the heart radiating off his body, the scent of fresh soap and something distinctly Andre filling my senses. I wasn't thinking anymore, just feeling. Every touch, every kiss sent sparks shooting through me. And before I knew it, I was tugging him down onto the bed with me. Andre's towel fell away as he climbed on top of me, his body pressing me into the mattress. We were a mess of tangled lips and hurried kisses, neither of us able to get enough of the other. "Landon," he whispered against my lips, his voice breathless and filled with something that made my heart ache. "Yeah," I managed to reply, my own voice barely more than a whisper. "Je want you," he said, his broken English somehow making the words even more intense, more real. I didn't know what to say, so I just kissed him again, letting my actions speak for me. We didn't need words, not now. Everything we felt, everything we wanted, was right there in the way we touched, the way we kissed. One thing led to another, and soon we were lost in each other, all the confusion and uncertainty melting away in the heat of the moment. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before, something raw and real and absolutely incredible. I don't remember the events of the day after that, but I do remember that I went to sleep well in the arms of a stranger. The next afternoon. The next morning we took a bus and managed to reach the airport just before my flight. My flight was earlier than Andre, and for some reason, I was glad about it. I don't think I could have managed to see him go without wanting to stop him. "I guess this is it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though there was a tightness in my chest. "You're heading back home, and I've got to catch my flight." Andre nodded, his blue eyes meeting mine with a mixture of sadness and something else. Something that made my heart ache. I go home," he replied, his English as broken as ever, but somehow it made everything more real, more personal. I hesitated, not wanting this to be the last I saw him. "We should, exchange numbers. Keep in touch," I suggested, trying to sound casual, even though the thought of leaving without a way to contact him felt wrong. A small smile tugged at the corner of Andre's lips, and he nodded again. Numbers." I pulled out my phone, unlocking it and opening up the contacts. "Okay, what's your number?" I asked, glancing up at him. Andre looked almost shy for a moment, which was unusual for him. He took my phone, typing in his number and handing it back to me. When I looked down at the screen, though, I was surprised to see that his contact was already saved. I blinked, confused. Wait, it's already saved? How? Andre rubbed at the back of his neck, looking sheepish. I save, he admitted, his accent thick. I not think you asked, but I want you forget me. His confession caught me off guard, and I could feel my cheeks heating up as I realized what he'd done. He'd saved my phone, his number in my phone, just in case I didn't ask for it. My heart did a little flip at the thought, and couldn't help but smile, even though I felt a blush creeping up my face. I wasn't going to forget you, I said, my voice softer now. I'm glad you saved it. Andre's smile widened, and for a moment, felt like the rest of the airport disappeared, like it was just the two of us standing there. But then the loudspeaker crackled to life, and the announcement blared through the terminal, calling for passengers of my flight to start boarding. I felt a pang of disappointment as reality came crashing back. That's me, I said, reluctantly picking up my bag. I guess I should go. Andre's smile faded just a bit, but he nodded. Yes, you go, he echoed, his voice a little quieter now. I hesitated, not wanting to walk away, but knowing I had to. Goodbye, Andre, I said, taking a step back. But before I could turn around, Andre reached out and grabbed my arm, stopping me in my tracks. Wait, he said, his voice firm. I turned back to him, my heart pounding, unsure of what he was going to say or do. Andre didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his blue eyes intense. Then, without warning, he pulled me close, one hand cupping the back of my neck, and pressed his lips into mine. I froze for a second, too shocked to react, but then I melted into the kiss, my eyes fluttering shut as I kissed him back. It was different from the kiss we shared in the hotel. It was filled with something deeper, something that made my chest feel tight and my head spin. I could feel the urgency in the way he held me, like he was trying to make the most of the little time we had left. When he finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart racing. I stared at him, my mind still trying to catch up with what just happened. Andre looked at me, his expression serious. Landon, I will not want this goodbye, he said, his voice low and sincere. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Me neither, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair away from my face. Maybe, we see again? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, unable to trust my voice at the moment. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to think that this wasn't the end and that we'd find a way to see each other again. The loudspeaker crackled to life once more, reminding me that I didn't have much time left. I forced myself to take a step back, even though it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. I really have to go, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Andre nodded, letting his hand drop to his side. Yes. Go. He agreed, though his eyes never left mine. I gave him one last lingering look. Then, with a heavy heart, I turned and started walking toward the gate. Just before I reached it, I heard Andre's voice call out to me one last time. Landon! I turned back, and he was still standing there watching me. He didn't say anything else. He just smiled. A soft, sad smile that made my chest ache. I smiled back, giving him a small wave before finally turning and heading through the gate. As the plane took off, I couldn't stop thinking about that last kiss, the way it had made me feel, and the way Andre had looked at me. Maybe this was just the beginning after all. The only good thing was I had his number and couldn't help but feel giddy at the idea of texting him as soon as the plane would land. Have you ever had an adventure with a stranger? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force. Stay wholesome.